Have you ever screamed at your screen watching Death Note? Watching a certified genius with the perfect weapon who should have won, throwing it all away? I have. He should have won, but he didn't. And it wasn't because L was smarter. The only thing that ever beat Light was Light's own ego. I'm gonna prove it by diving into the exact moments he lost and the simple fixes that had me spinning in my chair the first time I watched, because if he'd only made these changes, he'd have been unbeatable. This is the autopsy of a genius who did some pretty stupid things. For those not familiar with Death Note, because I'm sure there'll be a few of you out there, the story begins with Light Yagami. Light wasn't just smart, he was next level smart. He got perfect scores on every exam and was accepted into Toho University, basically Japan's Harvard. He was on the fast track to world domination, academically at least. At home was Soichiro Yagami, his dad, who was a top detective in the Japanese police. He was a straight-edge type obsessed with justice, so growing up, Light was constantly told about morality, duty, and doing the right thing. It made Light a deep believer in justice. And another important thing about Light is that he was the kind of guy people gushed over and idolized. He was good-looking, had next-level charisma, and was charming and polite. But Light was bored. Existentially bored. Everything came too easy to him, and that inflated his ego. He started feeling superior because he knew he was smarter than everyone. It was the ultimate setup for one of anime's most epic falls from grace. One day, a Shinigami called Ryuk — Shinigami are basically death spirits from Japanese folklore, and in Death Note a bit like the Grim Reaper — dropped his Death Note. Death Notes are the books Shinigami use to collect the dead. If you write a name, a time, and a means of death in them while thinking of the person's face, that person will die. If you don't put a means of death, they'll pass from a heart attack within 40 seconds. The problems start when Light finds Ryuk's Death Note. Touching it means that Light can see Ryuk, and it also ties Ryuk to Light as a protector, though really, Ryuk is pretty curious about what might happen when a mortal wields that kind of power, and Light feeds his apple addiction, which helps. Light thinks the world is rotten to its core, so he takes his new weapon and his deep sense of justice and starts a crusade, using the notebook to take out criminals. He gains the moniker Kira, hoping to build a utopia where he alone will rule as its god. But he isn't the only smart guy in town. People start to notice the deaths, but with no hope of linking them together, they turn to a man who might be just as smart as Light, a reclusive, world-class detective known only as L. What follows is one of fiction's most epic mental battles, a tense psychological cat-and-mouse game where each move is a calculated risk, one genius against the other. With his brains, the perfect untraceable weapon, and a demon as a sidekick, it's Light's game to lose. So why does he lose? I think it's down to 5 key mistakes and one big problem, and I'm gonna explain what they are. His first mistake was made pretty early on. After several days of anonymously killing criminals, the world realizes that these deaths are almost, but not quite, random. So almost, but not quite random that they have to be linked somehow. They name the shadowy judge, jury, and executioner behind them Kira. L, hoping that Kira has an ego, devises a simple but brilliant trap. A man named Tailor, a death row inmate, appears on a broadcast pretending to be L. He attacks Kira, saying, "I consider this crime to be the most atrocious act of murder in history," and calling Light's actions evil. Furious at being challenged, Light's pride explodes. He scoffs, "That fool, he'll never find me," and with his usual smug grin, he writes Tailor's name in the Death Note. 40 seconds later, the man dies of a heart attack on live television as the screen fades out. In that moment, Light believes he's proven his absolute power. In reality, he's just lost. What Light didn't realize, and what had me screaming at him when I watched, was that even though they claimed the broadcast was being shown worldwide, it was only being shown in the Kanto region of Japan. Before this moment, Kira could have been anyone on Earth, but with this one kill, Light gave a big chunk of the game away. L now knew that Kira was real, that he actively watches media broadcasts about himself, himself that he can kill from a distance and that he lives in the Kanto region of Japan. But worse was what it told L about Light's psychology. It proved that no matter how clever Kira might be, his emotions get in the way. He's a prideful, reactive, and arrogant human who can easily be provoked. Not being able to tolerate the thought that someone might think you're not intellectually superior even a second is known as narcissistic reactivity. And it might be Light's biggest weakness. What should Light have done? That's obvious. Nothing. The safest, most logical, and best move was to ignore the broadcast. He shouldn't have been watching it, or if he did watch it, he should have used that big brain of his for a second to work out that the reclusive and legendary L isn't likely to be appearing on a worldwide broadcast and telling everyone his name just to boast that he could catch Kira. Why he fell for it, I'll never know. Even geniuses can be pretty dumb sometimes, though in Light's defense, maybe he didn't think L would be willing to risk someone's life like that. After all, L is almost as responsible for Tailor's death as Light is. If Light absolutely had to do something, he could have waited days, even weeks to kill Tailor, finding out who he really was first and then taking his life in a way that seemed natural. He could have taken L's cake and eaten it. L would have been spinning in his chair and his investigation would have been global, unfocused, and twisted up like a cherry stalk. Light's greatest weapon, or maybe his second greatest weapon, was near perfect for anonymity, but now he had a giant target on his back, all because he was so arrogant. But that didn't bring Light down on its own. For that, he needed to tap into another part of his narcissism. Light's second major blunder was the worst mistake of them all, as far as pinning down where he lived is concerned. By a stroke of good or maybe bad luck, his dad had been made head of the Kira task force alongside L. So Light saw an opportunity. In the same episode as the first mistake, he started using his father's police computer behind his back. Not only did this mean he knew how much or how little the task force knew, he also had access to confidential, non-public information. That meant he could kill criminals even before their crimes were even reported in the news. Light, in another moment of weird stupidity, saw this as a way to display his godlike power and didn't really think about what that would tell L. To L, it was a gift. Light killing criminals using information only accessible to the Japanese police shrank L's suspect pool even more. By the end of the second episode, Kira had already gone from being any one of the billions of people in the world to one of the millions of people living in Kanto to just the 10,000 or so individuals that worked for the National Police Agency. This single, arrogant shortcut led to L putting officers' families under a microscope. One officer, Ray Pember, ended up on Light's shoulder, and Light's trips through the police files and some erratic behavior only tightened the noose. The fix, once again, was simple discipline. Light didn't need to use his dad's computer. I never understood why he couldn't resist it. Killing people before anyone knew who they were made him an obvious suspect. I mean, he had a limitless supply of targets from public sources like newspapers, television, and the internet. There was no good reason to use his father's classified data other than to feed his growing god complex and his impatience for a new world. Impatience before intellect. That's Light. A better strategy would have been to kill criminals from all over the world, randomizing the times and methods of death and creating a pattern that could never be traced. Patience should have been Light's friend. A slower pace was a small price to pay for his utopia. If Light had avoided this shortcut, L would have had no reason to send the FBI to Japan, and Light's family would have been completely off the radar. The investigation would be stalled with no path forward. Instead, Light's impatience and hubris handed L a trail of apple pips that led almost right to his door. And that trial, in turn, led to not only one of Light's most brilliant tactical victories, but also one of his worst strategic blunders. To understand this blunder, I needed to start with a little setup involving FBI agent Ray Pember, who I mentioned earlier. Ray Pember was tasked with following Light's tail. He was about to dismiss him as a suspect, just seeing a normal, well, if not normal exactly, then probably not murderous student. Light knew he was being followed, but he didn't know he was nearly off the hook, so he engineered a bus jacking. By episode 4, Pursuit, Light had realized that not only can you take people's lives using the Death Note, you can get them to do things by writing their names and an action in the book. So, Light wrote the name of a bank robber called Kiichiro Ozureda that the FBI were investigating in the book, and used the Death Note to make him hijack a bus that both he and Rei were traveling on. After Light tricks Rei into touching a piece of the Death Note, Ozureda sees Ryuk, panics, and runs off the bus into traffic and is hit by a car. In the next episode, Tactics, Rei admits who he is to Light, then goes home after Light promises not to tell his father what happened, and that Rei blew his cover. That's all Light needed. Now he can do some research on Rei. Later, Light follows Rei, catches up with him, and admits that he is Kira, all while telling Rei not to turn around and look at him. Light threatens to kill Rei's fiancée unless he writes the names of the FBI agents onto pieces of the Death Note. Then, after letting Rei know who he is, Light kills Rei. Tactically, hence the episode being called Tactics, it's a masterpiece. In one act, Light wiped out every FBI agent in Japan. But strategically, it was a catastrophe. It told L that Kira was a ruthless monster willing to target law enforcement, not just a vigilante. But that wasn't Light's big mistake. That came right after. Now, L's suspicions were even more laser-focused on a small group connected to the Japanese police, including Light. So for some reason, Light thought it would be a good idea to offer to join the Kira Investigation Task Force. In his mind, it was a brilliant idea. Get close to L, find out what his real name was, write it in the Death Note. But he underestimated L. He'd walked into a lion's den, occupied by a man as smart as he was, maybe even smarter when he was sat cross-legged and fueled by candy. The flaw here is as basic as it gets. Light's power came from his anonymity. By joining the task force, he put himself under direct 24/7 observation of the one person on Earth who could catch him. Well, not the only person, as it turns out, but we'll get to that. Again, this decision was driven by pure arrogance. At this point, just 5 episodes in, I was starting to realize that Light probably had narcissistic personality disorder, and like most narcissists, he overestimated his ability to manipulate people. Light was totally convinced he could outthink L in a face-to-face battle of wits. He saw it as the ultimate competition, a tennis match between their intellects, and an actual tennis match at one point. If you can actually call that a tennis match, it's more of a sort of, well, what do you think that was all about? Anyway, that had nothing to do with Light's dream of cleansing the world, and everything to do with his need to prove how superior he was. All he had to do was keep distant and let L chase shadows. Time was on Light's side. L was the one who had to produce results. Light could have continued his crusade while staying safe and anonymous, just letting the investigation grow cold. L would have never been able to directly observe his personality, his intelligence, and work out that he was Kira. The tennis match, the shared university classes, the constant psychological probing, none of it would have happened. Light would have stayed a ghost, not a man sitting across the room. But that wasn't his only tactical mistake. Misa Amane, the second Kira, was introduced in episode 11, Assault. She's the single greatest liability Light ever met. Seriously, a total pain in the you-know-where. Reckless, emotionally unstable, and obsessively devoted to him, she was a walking security breach. Her careless actions as the second Kira drew L's attention fast, while her Shinigami, Rem, had the power to kill Light if he ever harmed Misa. She was a ticking time bomb, but Light kept her alive. There were 2 reasons for this. First, and this is a pretty good reason, killing Misa by obviously using his Death Note wasn't a great idea because Rem, her Shinigami, would then kill him. Game over. Second, Light thought that Misa's Shinigami eyes, which could see a person's true name on sight, were too valuable a tool to lose. But to Light, she was never a partner. She was just a tool to use. But the potential reward of using Misa's skill was dwarfed by the massive risk of her exposing him. She drew suspicion, which eventually led to both of them being detained by L, and so so much worse. The best play would have been to meet her, use her Shinigami eyes to learn L's name, and then once L was out of the picture, find a way to end her that wouldn't have made Rem suspicious, which should have been easy for a genius like Light. If Light had done that, the entire second act of the series and Light's eventual downfall could have been avoided. There would be no memory loss, no Yotsuba Corporation, no near-fatal imprisonment. Watch the show if you don't know about any of that. I'm spoiling it enough as it is. L would likely have died much earlier. Oh, sorry, spoilers. Leaving behind less evidence for his successors, and no living human would know that Light was Kira. His victory would be absolute. The fact that he couldn't do this shows that his desire to manipulate and control people outweighed his judgment, or maybe how good her adoration for him felt. That ego, again. He kept a dangerous piece on the board for far too long, and it almost cost him the game, because L's death, when it did happen, wasn't the victory Light hoped it would be. In the final part of the story, after L's death, Light had effectively won. He'd assumed L's mantle within the Japanese task forces controlling the investigation team, and was free to operate as Kira without fear of being caught. But his ego wouldn't let him stop. He needed the world to continue to fear Kira. He also needed to throw off the suspicion of L's successors, particularly Nier. So he recruited two proxies, both dedicated to Kira's mission to help him keep Kira alive: the fanatical prosecutor Teru Mikami and his former girlfriend Kiyomi Takada. The strategic flaw was a complete failure of risk management. Light, in the ultimate expression of his god complex, thought that he could perfectly predict and control his followers, but he was wrong. Light introduced a sort of variable he couldn't control: people. You'd think he would have learned from his mistake with Misa, but no. So, when Takada was kidnapped in the third from last episode, Malice, Mikami acted on his own, ignoring Light's meticulous plan. This was all Nier needed. Nier pieced his puzzle together, predicted Mikami's fanaticism, had him followed, and with a little help and a little luck from Mello, rest in peace Mello, and some fake death notes, that's all a bit complicated and I don't want you stuck here for hours, so check out the show if you haven't, exposed Light as Kira. In the end, Light's grand plan didn't fail because Nier and Mello were smarter, though maybe they were. It failed because a human being acted like a human being. Ironically, Light, in his arrogance, missed that people are flawed. This fix was the simplest of all. He should have just declared victory after L's death and stopped. After killing L, Light held the most powerful position in the world. The smart move was to have Kira gradually fade away. He could even have let the world believe that Kira was beaten by him because his intellect is so superior to everyone else's, including L's. That would have fed his massive ego. Continuing to kill through proxies only made things risky without any strategic gain. If Light had simply stopped killing, Nier and Mello would have been left with a cold case. There'd be no new patterns to analyze, no new people to track. He could have lived out his life as the secret god of the new world he'd already created. But no, his narcissism required validation. He didn't just want to win. He needed everyone to know he was winning forever and ever. It was this need that led directly to his screaming, pathetic end on the floor of the yellow box warehouse. So, how could Light Yagami have won? Well, that's simple. He could have kept his head down and thought his actions through a bit more. It could have gone like this. Phase 1. Kill criminals randomly, using only public information from international sources. Randomize everything. Become a ghost, a force of nature that can't be tracked. Phase 2. Keep doing that. Never engage with investigators, never seek recognition. Let L and his successors exhaust their resources by chasing a phantom. Let the fear of an invisible, unknowable judge be the force that changes the world. Patience is what makes a death note the ultimate weapon. But that strategy is boring, slow, and anonymous, and that's why Light Yagami was psychologically not up to it. Because really, there's a single big big mistake that cost all the others. He couldn't get past his own ego because of his narcissism. He didn't want to be an invisible god. He wanted to be worshipped, and that really got him caught just a few episodes in. The rest was inevitable. Light was basically just spinning plates or chairs for the rest of the show until he was finally beaten. Because really, all of these mistakes came down to one thing. The reason he failed is that he was Light Yagami. His downfall was in every smug grin, every dramatic monologue, every moment where he took an egotistical potato chip and ate it. In the end, the only name Light Yagami truly needed to worry about was his own. If you like this video, then maybe you can go here to find out how my emoji movie would win Oscars instead of 10 Razzies. That's right, I said an Oscar.